What if the reason your business feels harder than it should isn't because you're doing it wrong, but because the entire system that you're operating inside of is actually the problem? If you've ever felt like you're building something bigger than what currently exists, questioned the traditional models of business, sales, or even the economy itself, or known deep down that there has to be a better way to create value, wealth, and impact, this conversation is going to expand how you think. What happens when you stop trying to win inside a broken system and instead start building entirely new ones and building inside of those? The next level of leadership isn't just about scaling what already exists. It's actually about having the courage to challenge the assumptions that are underneath it. And when you do that, you don't just grow your business, you redefine the game. Today's guest is a true visionary and systems thinker. Greg Keele is an entrepreneur who doesn't just start businesses, he designs them. With a background in entrepreneurship, education, and economics, Greg has spent years building companies, teaching others how to do the same, and rethinking how value is actually created inside of the marketplace. But what makes Greg different and why I wanted him to come on the show is how he thinks. He's not interested in just running businesses. He's interested in building systems that run themselves. In fact, as he shared with me, his zone of genius is creating the model, structuring the entire ecosystem, and then letting others execute so he can stay in the seat of the visionary owner and not the operator. From building entrepreneurship programs for students to developing scalable platforms across industries to now exploring entirely new economic frameworks like his coherence choice function and community-driven capitalism models, Greg is asking bigger questions than most entrepreneurs even consider. Questions like, what if people aren't making decisions based on logic, but on belonging, identity, emotion, friction, and perceived risk? What if our current economic systems were never designed to serve the average person, and they weren't? And what would it look like to build something better that serves all of humanity? Greg describes himself as, and this is my favorite, as a revenge entrepreneur, not from bitterness, but from a deep desire to rebuild systems that have extracted value from everyday people like you and me and replace them with models that actually serve our communities. And whether you agree with all of his ideas or not, this conversation is going to challenge you to think differently about business, leadership, economics, and your role as a creator in this fast and ever-evolving. I'm Kimberly Spencer, founder of Crown Yourself, TEDx speaker, and high-performance business coach to sovereign, visionary leaders who are here to build businesses and lives on their own term. This podcast exists to challenge the way that you think about success, leadership, and what's actually possible when you stop following outdated models and start leading from your own truth. So if you're ready to question the system, maybe even revolutionize it, rethink the rules, and stick around. And if you haven't already, click subscribe to the Crown Yourself podcast so you never miss conversations like this that will expand your thinking to the highest level. And with that, let's dive in. Welcome, Greg, to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. Super awesome monologue to start. And I'm very intrigued to see where this conversation goes.
So you and I met at the Inside Success Network's gala because you and I are both coming up on the show Next Level CEO with Damon John. And I connected with you because you have such a beautiful, robust personality and conviction around how you serve and kind of a no bullshit attitude, which I always resonate with.
Yeah, well, if there's one thing I don't have time for, it's bullshit. I got time for a lot of things, but shenanigans and bullshit are not in my daily repertoire.
What are the shenanigans and bullshit that most entrepreneurs get stuck in?
I think the most annoying part about business, right, is people who do not communicate. And I'm not talking about, can you form a sentence? Can you, intrigue people? Can you solve a problem? It's literally the simplest task of, I get email, then I email them back, right? I pick up my phone call. And so much is wasted inside of the business world and in life in general, just by not communicating simple things with people. It takes less than 3 seconds to say, hey, sorry, I'm busy, I'll call you later. But the entire world has lost this. Maybe it's social media, maybe it's just the times. But the one thing that I've noticed across all facets of life, and especially in business now, is people just stop communicating. And that's what's causing, that's my definition of shenanigans, right? Because I can solve problems extremely fast. But when I rely on somebody else for some piece of information or action, I can't do anything unless they do that one little thing. And most of the time, it takes a fraction of a second to actually do it, right?
Yeah, it's those little simple things. And I get it. Like, I think also there's a glorification of this is who I am, identity-based issues where it's it's like, oh, well, let me blame it on this. Let me blame it on my circumstances. Let me blame it on my diagnosis. And oh, isn't this funny for me to be? I think also, especially for female founders, like especially in the coaching industry, I've seen this glorification of I'm going to do it my way. And it's almost a hubris around, well, they'll have to get back to me. And I'm like, well, you can communicate, you can pre-frame some things. Like I pre-frame that I answer emails at 4:30. Like I'm not going to be answering your emails much during the day, but at 4:30, I'll get to them. But that sets the tone for communication. When you are building and scaling operations in your business, what are the communication standards that you hold your team to?
Well, there's a difference between what I hold my team to and what I hold myself to, right? Because I can't expect other people to have the same type of urgency that I do, right? And that's why I'm in the seat that I'm in. When someone emails me, there's a 98% chance that I get it and respond within 30 seconds, right? Unless I'm doing some other thing that keeps me away from my phone, because I get notifications on my phone with emails, it gets sent back right away. When I get a text message, I reply to all text messages, generally as quickly as humanly possible. And the reason I do this is because, like I mentioned before, you can't build something on your own. It always requires other people to do things. And every single minute that someone is waiting on me is another minute that they're not able to do whatever it is they need from me. Right. And that turns into many minutes or hours, or, the corporate world. I get things done in 5 minutes that would take 5 weeks in the corporate world because we need to send emails here. And then this person needs to email this person. And then this person has to talk to this person. And then after a week of that, then that person who we could have just communicated with in the matter of 10 seconds, this one little problem. Now we've delayed what we're doing by weeks. I also learned that from the education system. I was a teacher, entrepreneurship teacher and work experience teacher for 8 years. And, the biggest problem we had even then was communication, right? And I understand, right? Teachers are in class, they're not on top of their emails. I was always in a position where I could be on top of my emails. And when a kid emailed me, I emailed them back. And they thought it was like insane. They're like, dude, I never get emails back from my teachers. And I'm like, well, this is not rocket science, right? And I was generally less busy because I'm pretty efficient in my time. But I learned this in the education system, right? Teachers emailing back each other, emailing administrators, getting parents to respond to them. That's why they're working 50, 60 hours a week. It's not because there's 60 hours of work to do in a week. It's because we're waiting for all this communication to happen, right? Hey, Mr. Keele, can you fill out, little Susie's IEP form? Yeah, I can. Done. Right. But what does that really look like across the entire teacher network? Right. 3 days from now, Mrs. Jones is able to read the email, and then it takes her another 3 days to fill it out. Mr. Jackson, he same thing, right? He gets out of class, he's got this whole list of emails, and a week later he gets around to writing the IEP feedback that he needed to put in, which only took him like 2 minutes, right? So it's this like process of interconnected communication that takes forever. And that's what's killing business.
Mm.
It's not innovation. It's not, it's none of those things. It's the bureaucracy, the levels of disconnect between the people who need to make a decision and the people that they need to talk to in order to make a decision. And Elon Musk talks about that a lot.
Oh yeah,
He's kind of
speed.
Speed, right? The question is not how good is my idea. The question is, what's my idea? How fast can I build it? And how fast can I learn from what didn't work, right? To iterate this thing into something that will work. Because I can guarantee you, right? I will beat the majority of people out there in any business task, not because I'm smart, because I'm clearly not, right? Not because that I'm, any more capital driven. It's none of those things. It's, you give me an idea, I'll iterate it inside my mind really quickly, and then I'll build it, and then I'll test it, and then I'll rebuild it. And by the time, you have gone out and thought about this for a week, right? And then said, oh, this is what I want to build, right? And then I'm going to think about building it, and then, in time I'll build it, right? I've already iterated 30 times. And that's why I'll beat you, because that's just how it works.
Right? Yeah. And I think what you're speaking to is a problem that I've seen with a lot of new business owners coming from corporate, where they're used to that longer string of communication, needing approval, needing sourcing ideas, needing to crowdsource approval from other departments and things like that. So they go out to start their business, and suddenly they're posting in the Facebook groups and should I do this website this way, or should I do it this way? Or what would be the best product? Would you want to buy this? I'm like, you know how if someone actually wants to buy it? They buy it.
Right. Well, and you can't buy something you can't see.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't have to be the perfect work of art like this picture behind me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like guy Rodney Lowe Jr., I've got about 10 or 12 of his pieces. And he literally walks out into the middle of the wilderness with a tent and an old school film camera, no digital, and he'll sit here for 3 days waiting for that shot, right? But the thing is, he's taking pictures the whole time, right? And you're waiting for the perfect shot in business, right? But if you just take a bunch of pictures along the way, right, you can iterate these things much faster.
How does this apply to your economic models of what you see? Because if we're dealing with a greater systemic issue of communication breakdowns, of the education system, quite frankly, training people to be workers, not entrepreneurs, how can we build a new economic model that, even with these problems that we're currently facing with communication?
Well, I think we diverge a little bit, specifically from the communication issue when we talk about economics.
Mm-hmm.
From a simple perspective, we maximize our utility, right? And we'll talk a little bit about utility in a minute, but we maximize our utility by making quick decisions, by communicating quick, right? But what are we even talking about in the general field of economics today, right? The primary drivers of our economic thought are this free market utility maximization concept, right? And utility for non-economists, right, is kind of just a word that we use to say value, in a more complex word that we really don't have to get into, right? But how do we maximize our value personally and, in the world around us, right? That's in my opinion, utility as it's relevant to us, right? And the entire world of economics is built off of this concept that humans are innately utility maximizers, right? I do what's best for me, right? I take the data, I say, okay, well, this thing will make me money, this thing will make me happy, this thing will, improve my life at some point, right? And economists assume that we have this calculator in our brain that is rationally deciding what our best decision is based on that crazy calculation that we maybe used to make in the past, but it clearly doesn't happen now, right? Because the world has changed, right? So it's it got me thinking, right? And over the last couple of years, as I've been going into business, I really realized that people are not making rational decisions, right? And what does rationality mean to me? In this context, it means that I'm making something that makes sense on all fronts for me, for my best interest. But it's clearly not happening, right? It's
Yeah.
we're clearly not in a world where we've got 300 million people in this country doing what's best for us and for everybody else, right? Adam Smith kind of talks about that personal, maximization of my own utility and well-being. John Nash, kind of in the 1900s, kind of took that a little farther. But ultimately, what we have today is a completely different set of variables than we had 100 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
right? They weren't thinking about, social media, right? And interconnectedness of everybody at any time, no matter what. They weren't
Everywhere at
thinking about
once.
decision bias, right? Back in the 1900s, right? The current economic system makes sense because I have the choice, right? I go into a grocery store, I have a choice between, 2% milk and 2% milk from a local place, right? And the price difference is, X, right?
Mm-hmm.
35 cents, right? So I can ask myself, okay, do I want to buy the local milk for 37 cents, or do I want to buy, the milk that I'm not sure where it came from for 26 cents, right? So the price actually meant something, right? Because we didn't have all these options. Well, now, I mean, we go to the grocery store, and milk may not be the perfect example, but we can go to the grocery store and there's 8 different brands of milk, right? Each one of them has their own branding and, grass fed versus A2 versus, organic
Mm-hmm.
versus the Kroger stuff that God knows where it came from, right? Um, and so we can't make decisions purely off of price anymore, right? And so I decided to break that. I said, you know what? Like, what if nobody is making rational decisions based on our old definition of rationality and utility maximization, right? And that's when all the craziness started happening, right? Because we had talked about this. I'll go into more detail, but what are your thoughts about what we talked about? When we were about a month ago, we were talking about this whole concept of how economic decisions are made.
I mean, I'm seeing more and more like most people they're making buying decisions based on unconscious values. And when we look at through that lens, but most people don't take the time to understand their values system. So we're always like the economy is built on like how can I add value to the world and what is the value the utility that I'm bringing to the table. But if you also don't understand, like value is also translated to a subconscious form. And if you don't understand the subconscious values that are driving the bus, literally, like your subconscious mind runs 95% of your choices. So if you're not taking the time to examine the unconscious biases and values to which you're making the decision, and we need to restructure economy based on like understanding values are what attract you to your community in the first place anyways, is like you are most like the 5 people that you spend the most time with. Well, typically those 5 people will have similar values. And when we're looking at value in the marketplace and how people are buying, they are buying through a values-based filter. I think the economy has to be, and because there's so many choices and so many options, like as someone who's one of my primary values is health, I'm going to choose the grass-fed, organic, pasture-raised milk or like organic almond milk compared to like Kroger, compared to, the milk that I'll go and I'll, go to one of my kids' friends' house and I'll see them drinking. I'm like, well, maybe we don't drink that milk because my values are different in that way. And so how do we build an economic model that honors how we are making values-based decisions?
Exactly. And that's what I set out to do. And I'll talk about the coherence choice function first and then show you what the components of it are. So it's this idea that we make decisions based off of the coherence of ourselves and what's around us. So I've got an acronym that breaks down these 5 variables, right? It's called Be Safe. B stands for belong, right? I'm going to make an economic decision based on the group that I belong to. What is this group value, right? We're moving from the simple term of value to very specific defined versions of value, right? What is this group that I'm a part of? What do they value? And what decision do I have to make in order to fit into that, right? I'm a Porsche owner. I have a 911, and the group that is the Porsche Club of America, right? What are some things that they shun upon, right? Lots of modifications to the car, right? I have a completely stock car, right? I'm not going to go get aftermarket wheels and put an aftermarket wing on it, right? Whereas, one of my best friends has a Volkswagen R, Golf R, right? Which is a completely different set of, right, interpersonal and group belonging dynamics, right? They do want to put, the fancy exhaust on it. They do want to put the new wheels and put cool little stuff and tune it and do all these things, right? So, the values that each of those groups has influence us, right? They influence me to say, you know what? No, like I'm not gonna put, an aftermarket wing on this car, even if it does provide more downforce, but I'm not gonna do it because that's not what we do. Right? So that's the concept of belonging, right?
With the concept of belonging, I think with AI and the amount of divisiveness that there is in the world today, like how do we navigate against the like hyper micro communities of belonging that can develop from that?
Well, I think with that question, we go off kind of into the political economy side of things. And that is a completely different podcast that we would have to schedule.
That's another hour and a half to just dive into the politics alone.
Because I do have some writings on that, but I want to try to hyper focus on building this idea for users of, what is this coherence choice function and how does it relate to me, right? So we talked about belong, right? The next variable is self-interest, right? Self-image, right? How do I view myself? Who do I believe that I am, right? Why do I buy a $500 cappuccino maker when the $45 one does the same thing, right? Who do I believe I am, and how does that impact how other people see me, right? So we've got how do I fit into the world? Who do I think I am? And you can see self-image everywhere, especially now that we have social media, right? And having social media, having this, source of attention, source of communication, connection to the outside world, how I see myself greatly impacts my decision making, right? 150 years ago, who did I have to impress, right? Who did I have to, be around? I had my family, the Smiths down the street had an apple orchard, right? And we were this close knit community. But now, I mean, you've got celebrities in Miami talking to people in small town Ohio, and this cross contamination of cultures, right, creates this system where social media is now about, look who I am. This is who I believe I am. I'm going to make myself look cool, right? And I believe this is who I am, right? So I'm going to make decisions based on that. I'm going to be completely broke, but go buy the $1,000 Chanel bag, right? I don't know if Chanel is like, I don't know.
You think Chanel is $1,000?
I have no idea. No idea.
Try 10.
Well, this is what I'm saying, right? Like, we have this self-image of ourselves, and we are going to make economic decisions based on who we want to be, not based on the facts, right? Which is, I'm a small town, farmer, and this is the facts around me. What do I actually need, right? What maxes my utility in the old world? I need to be able to have all the food I can provide my family with. I need to have some transportation to work, right? I need, these core necessities that maximizes my utility because, this is what I need to provide for my family, right? But now that, someone in a small town who never would have seen the outside world, now they're getting flown out to, Abu Dhabi, right? And all of a sudden, these completely new factors are coming into play in their decision making. So self image.
I would say that has to do with like aspirational identity has such a play in it. And it's something that I've seen in marketing consistently when clients come to me and they're like, something's not converting. I'm struggling with social media, or this is more particularly for our company, Communication Queens, where we're coming in as consultants and looking at their messaging, their podcasts, their strategy. And we look at like what's in alignment as far as who they actually are versus who they're projecting themselves to be. And I've seen this a few times with both from the people who have a lower image of themselves, perhaps, like if we were to call it that, where they have a little bit of self-deprecation and they don't see themselves as successful as they actually are. And they were maybe taught not to brag. And so they didn't infuse their podcast with that like aspirational identity. And so their messaging isn't landing on them owning their successes. I've also seen it on the flip side of, twirling on Instagram reels and looking like and posturing your messaging as if there is like you're a radical success. And yet you've only gotten like one customer ever in your business. And that posturing and performance rather than actually like allowing yourself to be seen as seeing, here's my aspirations, but also like, here's where I'm at. And being truthful and authentic with where you are. And I think with marketing specifically, we have to look at that aspirational identity of how we're coming across and what we're sharing that is aspirational and what we're actually doing that's like, here's my reality, and like being able to hold that paradox of yes and both rather than posturing as, oh, I'm pretending to be, or as my ex's grandma said, playing house or playing entrepreneur. That has always stuck with me. That's why he's my ex, though, is because we were playing house. And that experience of seeing like, oh, this is playing at relationship. This is playing at being a business owner rather than actually embodying and saying, oh, a business owner is actually going to look at their P&L, and a business owner is actually going to, communicate with their team and look to scale and build something and build systems in place and those aspects of what operating and owning and growing a business is versus posturing and like twirling around on Instagram and showing all your photo shoots that you do, but not actually doing the things that actually generate business. And I know because I did the first. I did both. I've done it both ways. I've done the twirling. I did the twirling 10 years ago, and it sucked. And I had a glowing, glittery turd of a business where no revenue was coming in, but everything looked good. I don't like it. I don't recommend it.
Well, I mean, in a certain sense, I can see both sides of the table, right? Because when you're just getting out there trying to make it, if you're a struggling entrepreneur, if you're just starting out, right? A big subset of, your potential customer base doesn't want to know that, right? They don't want to know that you don't have millions of dollars in sales. Right? They don't want to know that you don't know, how to do this, right? They want to see confidence. They want to see, you know, this belief that I can provide this product to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of the flip side, right? But ultimately, when we're talking about, this be safe model, right? We have to identify the fact that we have values and we have a vision of who we want to be. And we're going to make decisions based on who that we think that is, right? Not
Mm-hmm.
who that actually is, right? So that's kind of the second positive side of this equation, right? So A is the next variable, right? Which is affect, right? Or more simply, how does this make me feel, right? How does this decision make me feel, right? I feel good about buying Starbucks in the morning because the other two variables align with that, right? It makes me feel good to drink this $7 coffee, right? I don't know why, right? Because I could make coffee at home, right? But in the short run, and affect, in my opinion, is mostly in the short run,
Mm.
right? We're not making decisions based on how we perceive we will feel 5 years from now, right? How do you explain people going to the car dealership and getting a $1,700 a month car loan?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's no logic, there's no utility maximization in that decision. Right? There's no $1,700 car that I have to reach for that is going to maximize my utility. Right? It might, buying Ferrari, right, might help me with the other two variables, right? But it's definitely not maximizing my utility. It's not maximizing the value to that I bring in and feeling, right? So let's jump back from Ferraris a little bit. Let's talk about the brand new, F-350 truck, right? That now costs $120,000. I'm making this decision potentially it's compulsive, right? Because I know that I only just tow 13,000 pounds, right? With whatever trailer I've got, right? Or maybe I don't even need to tow anything at all, right? And I know that a 2016 F-250 will solve this problem, right? But here we are in a 2026 F-350, right? Man, it's so cool. Like, I feel it, right? I feel this thing. And I'm not thinking about 2 years from now when I'm still stuck with this $1,700 payment, whether or not I can afford it, right? I'm making this decision because, man, this is shiny, this is new, right? This salesman says it does all those things, right? I saw the guy,
Mm-hmm.
down on the other farm have this new truck, and he was so cool, right? I feel it. It's going to make me feel good, right? And how often do we walk into the car dealer, right? And we buy that car, and then 3 weeks later, we're like, oh shit, I actually have to pay for this. Oh man, right? we didn't we didn't think about the long-term ramifications at the time because I'm making the decision because I feel it.
I think that has to play with our ego and our higher selves. Like the ego will always trade short-term satisfaction for longer-term like nagging pain and struggle versus the higher self, our vision, that intuition will choose a little bit of pain for like a longer-term gain. I mean, that's why people, no matter what level they're at, are still living paycheck to paycheck, where they will trade their short-term satisfaction for having longer term, the ache of continuing always needing to have to be working versus having short-term pain and saying, okay, I'm gonna save a little bit more, I'm gonna invest more, and then I'm gonna have a longer-term gain with having investment properties or things that pay me dividends so that I don't have to necessarily work. I think especially for women, like the idea of having completely passive income is foreign for a lot of women, unfortunately. Like completely passive to where like, no, you don't have to. Like you could stay at home and be with your kids and still make money and completely passive.
Yeah, well, it is tricky to formulate the system to create passive income.
Mm-hmm.
But, linking back to the previous two variables, right? You had mentioned, um, this investing concept, right? How does taking, $500 a month out of my hard-earned money to put in a Roth IRA, right? Why doesn't everybody do that, right? It's tax free in the future, right? Well, it doesn't make me feel good right now. That $500 takes away from my ability to project my self image today and be a part of the group that I want to be a part of, right? Like that money could be used better today for those purposes than me potentially, you know, being able to retire a couple of years earlier. And I've studied a lot of Dave Ramsey. This is his concept, right? And he's attacking these insecurities that people have that keep them in that paycheck to paycheck, right? And his program, for the people that it makes sense for, right, which is most people, right? That's what it does, right? It gets them to focus on this long-term affect versus the short-term. Robert Kiyosaki calls it doodads, right? Doodads are little things that we buy that take up our money that bring us nothing in the future, right? And I've studied Dave Ramsey. That's just not my style. I'm not a
Not my style either.
saver, right? Like I make chunk money, right? I do something that creates a bunch of money, and then create another thing, and I'm more of a like roller coaster kind of earner, right? Which is not a Dave Ramsey concept.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely for more of those who have like a steady paycheck. I mean, as an entrepreneur, you can definitely give yourself a steady paycheck from your company. And like I too am a chunk earner as well.
Yeah. So you look at these three variables, and this makes up the positive side of our decision-making process. So we add all these things together, right? And I'm not a quantitative economist, so I'm going to be seeking outside help from my buddy who I went to school with on this at some point when he's crazy enough to believe me. But you add these three things together, and you can think of it as kind of your mountain of decision making, right? If these are the only three things that you considered, then these are all the decisions we make. We make all these crazy decisions based on how we feel, and like that would be our decision making process. But there's a negative side to this equation, right? And we have things that get in the way of us making these decisions that we want to make, right? So the first one of those is friction, right? And this is where we're kind of coming into the entrepreneurial world, and I'll spin this all back, on entrepreneurship right now before I get into friction. So how many of you entrepreneurs out there have created a product that doesn't add one of value in one of these three areas, that doesn't make you feel good, right? That doesn't help your customer self-image or help them be a part of a group, right? The answer is it's never happened. Like, you don't create a new product that doesn't offer some kind of benefit, right? Right. And often it's a logical benefit, right? We have a new fitness tracker, right? We have a customer who is, they're a fitness person. This fitness tracker is light years ahead of, the next competitor, right? It looks cool, so they're a part of the running club, and everybody's going to say, right? It makes me feel good that, I have this perfect fitness tracker, right? So on paper, right, we've created a good product. Everybody should buy it, right? Everybody, because it's objectively better, right? But now you get to this negative side. So the first variable I'm going to talk about is friction, right? So what is friction? Friction is this concept that there is stuff in the way from my customers' current life and living situation and them using my product, right? This could be excessive paperwork. This could be having to learn a new system. This could be, I have to put in a bunch of hours in order to be a part of this, right? This concept of friction is what kills a lot of businesses, right? Because the cost of switching, right, or the cost of purchasing, right? Like, why doesn't everybody, go get government benefits, right? Let's be real. There's people in our country whose entire existence, right, is getting government benefits.
That was my grandmother.
Right? So they have no problem going through 3 months worth of paperwork, right? But I just lost my job, right? And I need money, right? Like now I have to go to the unemployment office. Now I have to deal with all this paperwork, right? I have to take this onboarding phone call, right? And then I have to take another one. And then 3 months later, they're like, "Oh, you're approved, and we'll start giving you money." Right. And then they give you the wrong amount of money. And then you have to, right? So this idea that there's stuff in the way of me making this economic decision, that's what kills a lot of businesses. Right?
Yeah.
And we just have to consider that. Right?
And not just like I love the example of government assistance, right? But I think also breaking it down into like a business entrepreneur model is I've seen entrepreneurs when they're starting their business and they're like, well, I have to have a website and I have to have a domain and then I have to learn marketing and then I have to, and I said, and like, I just make it really simple. I'm like, if you're just starting out, you need to make some phone calls to your network to start talking to them. You need to start talking to people. Like that's the website. I've had hundreds of thousands, millions of people to my website over the years. People are making buying decisions, yes, but ultimately, like a relationship, they'll make it so much faster. But I see entrepreneurs stack up. They stack up all of these. Well, I need to do, especially in the coaching world. Like when I first started my coaching business, I signed up for a business coaching program because I was 8 months pregnant with my first kid. And I thought I was doing it less for the program, more for just, I needed a community to keep me accountable. And as I was going through the program, I'd already built 2 successful businesses. Like I already had a successful exit. I just wanted a coach to kind of guide me through that process into motherhood and doing it with a kid. And I was going through this program and I was seeing all of the variables that were also stacked up that this coach was saying. And I was like, oh, the community was great. But the coach was like, oh, you need to have a brand photo shoot. And now you need to get your freebie offer in place. And now you need to, design your website. And I'm like, you need to like talk to people and start like offering your service. You just need to start talking to people. Like this is not rocket scientists, but we put so many steps ahead and then it extends the runway for us being able to even achieve the goal. And I think the hardest part that so many people put in front of them, like the easiest one, but also the hardest one is talking to people because of the fear of rejection and the belonging. And now you're changing your identity from who you have been to this person to who you are becoming now. And it's something new and it's scary to be in something new.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a perfect example that you brought up about friction, right? And starting a business, right? Why do a lot of people not start businesses? Well, I gotta get an EIN and I gotta get an LLC, which you don't, but
Yeah.
I gotta get a bank account. I gotta get a patent, right? Otherwise, like I can't start this unless there's a patent. And so all of those tasks, right, are a thing that deters someone from making a decision, right? Before we were talking about things that add into the reason to make a decision, because let's be real, right? Who doesn't want to own their own business and have passive income,
Yeah.
right? But like, are you willing to go through the stuff that you have to go through in order to make that? And the fact is 99% of people are not, right? It's not that people out there aren't capable intellectually, emotionally, physically of doing these things. It's, we don't understand and we're not willing to go through the friction that it takes to get to that point. And we quit and we go back to what we were doing before, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with, having a job, right? I had a job for a long time, but it's this friction. And then the next variable I'll talk about that pulls away is exposure, right? So exposure to this is essentially, what does this expose me to, right? If I do this thing, right? If I start this business, right? What could happen? Well, I could fail. That scares me. I'm going to stop, right? I could look stupid in front of my community, right? So I stop, right? I could offer this thing and nobody will like it, right? I'm too afraid to do that, right? I want the belonging. I want, this to be my life, right? It'll make me feel good, but I am too afraid that it's not going to work. So I'm not going to do it.
Mm. I think
Makes
that's why
sense.
most people stay in dabbler or hobbyist mode, and rather than actually scaling something of significance.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it takes a lot of, it takes a lot of balls to put something new out there and put yourself at the risk of looking stupid.
Yep.
Right.
And I see it also with those who have had, especially, I think it's even harder if you've had incredible success in another area where you've built a business that's very successful, and then you're stepping out from behind your business to then be the founder, the voice, going on podcasts, getting visible, sharing your story, being seen as who you are beyond just the business. That in and of itself is incredibly scary, and starting something new. And I think most people are scared of being a beginner again, especially after they've had significant success in another area of their career.
Exactly. So, the combination of friction and exposure risk, right? You know, these are the things that keep us from following our dreams, right? It's not self image that keeps us following from our dreams. It's those two negatives,
Mm-hmm.
those two risks, those two barriers between who I am today, right? And who I want to be in 5 years, right? It's not the motivation, right? It's that friction and risk.
So, taking this be safe model, how does this play into community driven capitalism when our identities are almost at stake in the economic model?
Right. Well, the first question I'll ask is, does anybody out there really think the economy is working for them? Like, do we
Right.
have 100 million adults out there who are all in agreement that this economic system that we are operating inside is fantastic and is working for us? I think we know the answer, right? And so, you have to understand that the actual economy, right? The people involved, right? We're built off of trust. We're built off of relationships. We're living next to each other. We see each other at the coffee shop, right? And the blunt fact is that our economic system is not designed to support those people, right? It's designed to extract as much value from those people as possible. And then the problem is, where does that value go, right? Think about, the idea of the local coffee shop versus Starbucks, right? Starbucks is this multi-billion-dollar corporation, massive, worldwide, right? When I spend $10 at Starbucks, where does that money go, right? Some of it, a very tiny portion of it, gets paid to the barista who, swiped my card and made my drink. God bless her, right? But all of the actual net economic growth from those transactions at Starbucks, they go back to Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
And when
And the
it's in Seattle,
shareholders.
what's that?
And shareholders. Like,
Exactly.
companies are
And
more
once it goes
beholden
back
to
to
their
Seattle,
shareholders than their customers if they're public.
yep. And then, it's circulating around Seattle and all the millions of managers and multi-managers and directors they have there, right? And then the money, then whatever's left over, goes back to the shareholders, right? Well, who are the shareholders, right? The shareholders are not us, right? The people are not like, we may think that we own shares in Starbucks, right? But the fact of the matter is that over 90% of the shares that are outstanding in the stock market are owned by BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street and all these giant funds, right, that actually own each other, right? Retail investors are a tiny part of the stock market. And frankly, the average person out there doesn't even have any stock market investments.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, who's got stock market investments, right? Boomers who have been, in this economy for 50 years, right? And here and there, younger millennials and stuff will have, stocks and bonds, but they're not taking up a huge portion or even a minuscule portion of the actual value that's owned, right? It's all owned by these companies who own each other, because State Street owns part of Vanguard and Vanguard owns part of BlackRock, and all these giant companies are extracting all of the money from us. Right? And It's not built, right, to make the actual people prosperous. So what does that mean, right, in my world, right? We talked about me being a revenge entrepreneur, right? It's not out of hatred, right? I don't hate big companies for doing their job, right? What is the purpose of a company, right? It's to earn money for a shareholder, right? So, like, I built Make Sense as the first step of this. I wanted to make it so that the money that the people were actually spending was going, first of all, to a cause that mattered to them, right? Which is the athletic sports teams and their kids. But I also wanted to make something where using the product that they are supporting the kids with, right, filters money inside of the community, right? They go and they we have a discount app, right? They support these kids. They go get buy one get one free, combination meal at Tito's Tacos, right? And this money is then being circulated inside of our community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's this concept in economics called velocity of money, right? And it basically means that we're measuring how quickly money is changing hands, right? But velocity of money doesn't define where that happens, right? So what I want to do is I want to make it so that the money is changing hands inside of our community, right? With people in our community, and keep it there as long as possible, right? So that we can all benefit from this, right? If you spend $10 one time a year and it leaves, well, your economic activity that's benefiting my community is $10. But if you spend $10 at a coffee shop that's local, and that coffee shop owner pays their local people, and then they go to, the local diner to get dinner, right? And they spend $10 on dinner, right? Well, now we've had local economic activity of $20. And then, the $10 that gets spent at, the diner, then half of that goes back to the coffee shop in the morning, half of it goes to the laundromat. And this is how velocity of money works inside of our communities, right? And it's just not working like that right now. Like, we are the drivers of economic activity, and all of our money goes somewhere else, right? So obviously we're out of money, right? And
Yeah.
we're talking about real estate, right? Who's buying all the real estate? BlackRock, Vanguard, giant companies,
Mm-hmm.
right? They come in, they artificially drive up prices, they price out, the people who lived in this community forever, right? There are thousands of communities across the country where the people that grew up there can't buy a house.
Yeah. That was me in Los Angeles.
Right?
Like, get $1 million shoebox.
Yeah. You got $1 million shoebox, big problem also up in Idaho, here in Colorado, lots of mountain towns.
Mm-hmm.
People have been there for 3 generations, right? The only way that they're able to stay there is because they bought a house 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And we're talking about, these giant private equity firms buying property, right? They're doing it so they can rent it, right? And, if a person owns a house, right, in our community, owns a house and rents it, right, that money's coming back in our community. But if I'm renting it from some giant investor who bought up an entire community specifically to rent it, the money is gone, right? And then it's filtering through that corporate network of these giant companies owning each other, right? So, like, it's no wonder that everybody is struggling. Like, I don't know anybody who isn't struggling. I'm sure there are lots of people out there who are, right? I don't know them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think.
Those people I met in college, but I haven't talked to them since. Everybody I know is, a sports coach, like a coach, a teacher, right? I meet people on the street. I talk about burning down our economy with people on the street. They're like, yeah, let's do it. I don't care what it is. Like, let's go. I trust you, man. So, that's who I am interacting with, right? I'm not interacting with the vice president's, kid of, Bank of America, right? I did in college. I knew that kid in college, right? But they went off into their, New York, high rises and all those things in the Hamptons, and that's just not my world, and it never will be my world, right? But I talk to the regular people, and the system is not working for the regular people.
And I think it's looking at, like, I think there's two branches of capitalism, and there's the free enterprise capitalism, which we haven't seen because we currently have corporate cronyism and the other branch of capitalism. And I think what you're modeled. I've studied conscious capitalism, and that's one of the things that we practice here at Crown Yourself and throughout my companies is being conscious with our dollars and conscious with the money that comes in, and then recirculating it back and being able to have it go to causes that like further and ripple good out and positive impact. But there's an aspect of social well-being that is so appealing with socialism. It's just in practice, it's never worked. Like, and every country that's tried full-on socialism has turned into a complete dictatorship. And like, you just look at, Mao and Stalin, and just the level of poverty that it ended up creating was worse than what it was before, even with an oligarchy. And looking at community-driven capitalism, I think one of the things with your model is that it does require us to stay in smaller local communities. It's not these gigantic countries, and it's not these gigantic transnational corporations. It is looking local as far as how can you keep money circulating within the community and growing the wealth of that community, almost like a DAO.
Yeah, well, I will note, right, that what the people believe socialism is more closely aligned with communism than socialism.
Yeah.
There is a very good example in human history of socialism working extremely well for the people. We're not going to talk about that because we don't want to get into that world. But what I can tell you is that
would it start with an N and this end with an I?
It might. And from an economic
perspective, yes.
I'm not talking anything political or social. I'm talking about a pure economic system of socialism working, and from that perspective it did. But what I'm talking about here with community capitalism, right, is taking the intent of socialism, which is let's create this thing for the people, right, to benefit the people involved, right? And let's use the mechanics that we know work from capitalism. We know that markets work. We know that prices adjust themselves. We know that efficient distribution of labor and capital achieves a great result. And, I have a pretty close relationship with free market capitalism. So when I was in college, my advisor at Claremont McKenna was a guy named Colin Rowe. He just recently died, rest his soul. He went to the University of Chicago, and his advisor and thesis reader was Milton Friedman. So, I'm in here at 18, 19, 20 years old, shooting the shit with Professor Wright. And I'm hearing this stuff straight out, like actually from Friedman's mouth. Right? And it is a fact that if we're talking about minimizing poverty, right, there is no better tool than the free market. Right? This is an observable fact, right, over the course of history. Once free market capitalism came to be in late 1700s, 1800s, right? Once we started deploying this, the quality of life in the places that deployed it has increased greatly. And even the most impoverished people in America still have it better than most other places. But that's what we lose sight of here, right? So you have this concept that we have to have markets, right? We have to have competition. We have to have, efficiency layers that make the means of production able to get to us.
Yeah.
Right. But what's the problem? Right. There are a small number of people, groups, organizations, networks, right, that are extremely good at this. Right. We end up with a bunch of giant companies, right, or a couple companies who own the entire food industry. Right. And they, who are owned by the same people we talked about before, their primary goal is to make more money. right? So what do? They inject the chickens with all kinds of crazy stuff to make them bigger so that they can make more money, right? They buy up all the local chicken farms so that, there's no competition, and they have a monopoly. And, in the last 100 years, we haven't really done much about monopolies,
Yeah.
right? Why is that? I mean, this is a side note because all those companies are buying off all the politicians, but let's steer clear of that. Right. So we have to take the good things about capitalism and the intention of socialism and put it together. Right. And that's what I'm building. That is my life's mission. I have Make Sense, which starts the flow of capital, in the community to the sports teams, and it distributes amongst the players, all of this. We're going to reorganize kind of how all of the marketing works for these small local businesses, right? Because what do they do right now? They hope for the best. They spend money on Google ads that they have no idea if they work.
Mm-hmm.
They're out on social media paying Mark Zuckerberg a bunch of money to, do something that has no measurable value, right? So that's a big part of it, right? Keeping the money in the community. The next layer of it that I've built is so I have two other projects, and one of them, is it's currently called Relio, codename Relio. It's this concept that our economy is built off of centralization, right? It's built off of a giant company opening up locations in different cities and then hiring people who hire people. And then after a string of that, we get to the final user. And, it's just the centralization of income earning, right, around these giant companies, which again are not owned by us.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So all this money, all this economic activity is getting extracted through this system of centralized income capture. And that's a problem if our goal is to improve our communities.
Yeah.
If that's my
I love what you've come up with because I think it very much is the rising tide lifts all boats. It's like as one person rises in the community and creates value and is able to pour back into the community rises as well. And so it creates this infinity symbol of almost prosperity that allows for expansion. But I think it seems to me like the only way that this would work is in smaller localized communities that like smaller central based communities rather than on a macro scale nationwide. Like it could work nationwide, but it has to be each community has to have sovereignty in a sense.
Yeah. So ultimately, you have to start in small communities.
Mm-hmm.
But we live in this age where technology is basically infinite, right? Could you organize a local group to do this without technology? Absolutely. But with the technology that I'm building, and I'm not going to dig too much deeper into this because I don't need people understand what I'm doing until I build it. You actually can do this across the macro scale with the tools that I'm building. Because of the distribution of everyone have cell phones, everyone having the internet, everyone having access to the same, basic necessities, right? We can build technology that inverts this flow of income and capital. Like I said, I do not want to get into it too much because I have a lot of work to do in building this technology, and it's not super far off, but it's about the intent, right? And at the simple level of how do we reorganize our business systems to keep the money flowing internally? That's it. And if the money is flowing internally in Canton, Ohio, right, and the money is flowing internally in Parker, Colorado, right, and its surrounding area, right, over time, because of this technologies that I've created, we'll be able to do it. And it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, when you build it,
What's that?
when it's built, will you come back on the show?
Well, I hope to come back on the show before it's fully built because it's gonna take a while. I can't like the technology itself is very easy to build, but actually implementing it, could take years.
Yeah.
Right? It could take decades, honestly. Because
Deploying
who are
it
we going
seems like a
after?
moonshot.
Yeah. Who are we going after? We're going after, you know, these established, you know, equity flow, good flow organizations that, I don't I don't think they're gonna be too happy about. So that's the best man.
Greg, how can we stay in touch with you? How can our listeners continue following your journey as you build out this economic model that I do believe is going to be supportive of communities and business owners and us all being able to rise together?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, I probably have to be more active on social media. I guess I don't know. I mean,
Company that could help you with that.
really, let me know. Let me help. I am not a social media poster. I consume some social media, but I do have an Instagram. I do have a Facebook. I do have a LinkedIn. Um, and I suppose if people started reaching out to me, I would talk to them. I'm not a big you know, sliding in people's DMs kind of guy, right? But yeah, I'm always like, here's the thing. We talked about communication at the start, and I'll close with communication, right? If you've got an idea, let's talk about it, right? If you want to do something good for the world, let's talk about it. And I will actually talk to you about it, right? And I'm here, to support people. I help kids build businesses for 8 years. I build my own businesses. My businesses are all aimed at directly supporting communities. I like people in my life who have similar goals, like beyond, Ferraris and yachts and boats and houses and things. Like those are all good things, and we're gonna get all of those things. But it's not about that, right? It's about how do I make one kid's life better, right? By making it so they can buy new cleats, and making it so they can go to Japan for a soccer tournament, and making it so their mom doesn't have to work 3 jobs in order to support all this. Right? That's what I'm about. That's pretty much all I got.
Amen. Well, Greg, I'm excited to have you back sooner rather than later. And if you love this episode, make sure you hit subscribe to never miss a conversation like this one with Greg. I think this one was so insightful. It's definitely got me thinking as far as how we can deploy some newer economic models into our own companies. And with that, as always, my fellow sovereigns, own your throne, mind your business, because your reign is now. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If what you heard resonated with you, be sure to subscribe and start creating a bigger impact now by sharing this with a friend. Just by doing that one simple act of kindness, you are creating a royal ripple to support more people in their sovereignty. And if you're not already following on social media, connect with me everywhere at crownyourself.now for more inspiration. I am so excited to connect with you in the next episode. And in the meantime, go out there and create a body, business, and life that rules. Because today, you crown yourself.